So hello everyone. Today we will be discussing about communication. We will be discussing this with my group, and for the speakers, it is I, Tenerife, and Bryan, Jericho. So to start our communication, Bryan, take the lead.
Next slide. So first, what is communication? According to Maurice Philip Wolff and Shirley, Cooper characterize communication as the exchange of information using symbols, such as words and messages. So communication can occur across various dynamics such as between a superior and subordinate, peers, a manager and a client, an employee and a government representative, and more. So this exchange can take place in person, through printed materials, or via electronic devices like telephones, among other methods. So within management, communication serves a specific purpose, and given its associated costs, it's crucial to utilize it efficiently. Next. So with this communication may be used to any of the given functions in the next slides. So next. So in functions of communication, the first example is information function. So this information function is a communication that provides data for decision making across the organizational tiers. An example would be a construction worker receives guidance on equipment usage, aiding future decisions on selecting the appropriate tools for specific situations. Another example would be a weather forecast informing people about upcoming weather conditions. So next would be motivation function. So motivational role communication frequently serves as a tool to inspire employee dedication to the organization's goals. Knowing this, it encourages employees to align themselves with the objectives of the organization through effective communication. An example would be a team leader, for example, encouraging his team members by highlighting the benefits of achieving a specific goal, inspiring them to put in their best effort. Next slide. So for the next slide is control function. So control function is a clear communication of reports, policies, and plans, delineates roles, defines responsibilities, and establishes authority. Effective communication of these elements facilitates efficient control within the organization. So to give you an example, a manager instructing employees on specific tasks to be completed by the end of the day. So the last function of communication is emotive function. So these repressed emotions in an organization lead to employee anxiety, impacting performance. So in this function, communication serves as a channel to alleviate internal pressure caused by various emotions, be it satisfaction, dissatisfaction, happiness, or bitterness, aiding individuals within the organization. So to give you an example, a motivational speaker evoking emotions in inspiration, enthusiasm in their audience. Next slide. So there are, in this slide, it is about the communication process. Knowing the communication process, it has 8 steps. Next slide. So according to these steps, it has sender, receiver, decodes, encodes, and develops an idea. So next slide, please. Knowing the 8 steps of the communication process, it follows these things. First is develop an idea. This develop an idea it refers to the cornerstone of successful communication lies in crafting a valuable concept. It's crucial that the message being conveyed holds significance or usefulness. For instance, a practical idea would be methods for preventing workplace accidents. So the next process is encoding. Following this, the subsequent stage involves translating the concept into language, visual representation, diagrams, or other relevant symbols apt for communication. It's crucial to predetermine the mode of transmission to ensure the idea is encoded appropriately, aligning with the specific demands of the chosen method. So next step would be transmit. So in this transmitting, following by encoding, the message is prepared for transmission using suitable communication channels like speech, body language, writing, TV, phone, radio, art, email, etc. Effective transmission is vital to ensure the message captivates the receiver's attention. This requires a channel devoid of barriers or interference, often termed as noise. So next slide. So in this we have decode. So in decoding, the subsequent stage involves translating the sender's message into format that holds significance for the recipient. So after transmitting, in this process, the communication process will be decoding. So it will decode the developed idea that was sent by the sender. So next would be accept. The receiver's next step involves either accepting or rejecting the message, with the possibility of partial acceptance or rejection in some instance. So the factors that will affect the acceptance or rejection is the accuracy of the message, whether or not the sender has the authority to send the message or require action, the behavioral implications of the receiver. Next slide. So in these last two communication process, it is the use, which is the subsequent step involves the receiver utilizing the information. If the message contains vital information for a pertinent task, the receiver might store and access it when needed. Alternatively, if action is necessary, the receiver may act accordingly. Otherwise, they might discard the message upon receipt, depending on their perception of the significance. So last process would be provide feedback. The last step in the communication process is for the receiver to provide feedback to the sender. So depending on the perception of the receiver, however, this important step may not be made. Even if feedback is relayed, it may not reach the original sender of the message. So this will be attributed to the effect of any of the communication barriers. Next slide. So forms of communication. Next slide. So forms of communication, we have verbal and nonverbal. So for verbal communication, it involves the transmission of information through senses of hearing or sight. This categorization of verbal communication into two classes is based on the modes of transmission. It may be oral or written. So to give you an example, uh, giving a speech, having a conversation, making a phone call, or delivering a presentation using spoken words. So next would be nonverbal. So in nonverbal communication, it is conveying a message through body language, time, space, clothing, touch, and aesthetic elements. So to give you an example, we have gestures, facial expression, body language, posture, eye contact, or even the tone of the voice used in conversation. All conveyed messages without using words. Next. So in verbal communication, we have these so-called classes. So the oral communication involves hearing the words from the sender and may also be matched with body movements, facial expressions, gestures, and eye contact, and sometimes feeling, smelling, tasting, touching, or involvement. Written communication aims to communicate through written word. This is favorable for some applications due to time, cost, and cost constraints. Next.
Thank you, Brian. And for the other half of our presentation, we will be moving on to the barriers to communication. So an example of the barriers in communication is personal barriers. So these personal barriers hinder effective communication due to one's own characteristics, such as emotions, values, listening habits, sex, age, race, religion, and education. Each factor has its own way on how it can affect the sender's delivery of the message or the receiver's interpretation of what is being conveyed. Moving on, another type of barrier is the physical barrier. So communication is interfered within the environment where the communication is taking place. These physical barriers include distances between communicators, walls, noise environments, etc. These barriers are related to the physical environment and can impede the transmission or reception of messages. So an example of this is inside a classroom. Imagine you're in a classroom and your teacher is teaching. Unfortunately, your classmates are noisy, so it hinders the communication process between the teacher and the listening students. Moving on to semantic barriers, another form of barriers in communication. Semantics involves the examination of meaning conveyed through symbols, such as words, pictures, or actions. Semantic barrier is an interference with the reception of a message that happens when the message is misunderstood, even if it is received exactly as transmitted. So an example is when the teacher says something and the teacher expected that the students got it, but unfortunately the students got another meaning. So they misunderstood the message, even if it is received exactly as transmitted. So how do we overcome these barriers in communication? So when obstacles hinder effective communication, specific measures should be taken to remove them. To address issues caused by noise, selective perception, and distractions, the following recommendations are suggested. So first is employ feedback to enhance comprehension and encourage suitable action. So whenever you're talking to someone and something is unclear, it is best to say that you don't properly understand it so that you can further have. Thank you, Brian. And for the other half of our presentation, we will be moving on to the barriers to communication. So an example of the barriers in communication is personal barriers. So these personal barriers hinder effective communication due to one's own characteristics, such as emotions, values, listening habits, sex, age, race, religion, and education. Each factor has its own way on how it can affect the sender's delivery of the message or the receiver's interpretation of what is being conveyed. Moving on, another type of barrier is the physical barrier. So communication is interfered within the environment where the communication is taking place. These physical barriers include distances between communicators, walls, noise environments, etc. These barriers are related to the physical environment and can impede the transmission or reception of messages. So an example of this is inside a classroom. Imagine you're in a classroom and your teacher is teaching. Unfortunately, your classmates are noisy, so it hinders the communication process between the teacher and the listening students. Moving on to semantic barriers, another form of barriers in communication. Semantics involves the examination of meaning conveyed through symbols, such as words, pictures, or actions. Semantic barrier is an interference with the reception of a message that happens when the message is misunderstood, even if it is received exactly as transmitted. So an example is when the teacher says something and the teacher expected that the students got it, but unfortunately the students got another meaning. So they misunderstood the message, even if it is received exactly as transmitted. So how do we overcome these barriers in communication? So when obstacles hinder effective communication, specific measures should be taken to remove them. To address issues caused by noise, selective perception, and distractions, the following recommendations are suggested. So first is employ feedback to enhance comprehension and encourage suitable action. So whenever you're talking to someone and something is unclear, it is best to say that you don't properly understand it so that you can further have comprehension and understand it further. Next is utilize various communication channels to improve information accuracy. Another one to overcome the barriers in communication is the repetition of messages ensures their proper reception. So whenever you feel like you're misunderstanding something or can't grasp it fully, it is always not a problem to ask the sender of the message to repeat what they've said. So another one is simplify language to ensure clear understanding and prevent confusion in meaning. So there are many words in this world, and in order to prevent confusion, it is best to use those words that are easily understood, unlike those words that are highfalutin and are very complex. So techniques for communicating in organizations. So communication takes place not only in school at home, but it can also happen in the workplace, for example, organizations. So there are three types of communication in organization: the downward, horizontal, and upward communication. So for downward communication, message flows from higher levels of authority to lower levels. So to put simply, it's like a manager talking to their subordinates. So areas of concern are implementation of goals, strategies, and objectives, job instructions, rationale, procedure, and practices, performance and feedback, indoctrination. So next up is the upward communication. So message flows from persons in lower level positions to person in higher positions. So example is a worker talking to his or her manager. So the areas of concern in upward communication are as follow: problems and exceptions, suggestions for improvement, performance reports, grievances and disputes, financial accounting, information. So lastly, we have horizontal communication. So this is where the message is sent to individuals or groups from another of the same organization level or position. So areas of concern are interdepartmental coordination, interdepartmental problem solving, staff advice to the departments. So we have next is the management information system. So what is the management information system? According to Boone and Kurtz, management information system is defined as an organized method of providing past, present, and projected information on internal operations and external intelligence for use in decision-making. This is used by corporate firms and typically consists of written and electronically based systems for sending reports, memos, bulletins, etc. It allows for communication within the different departments inside a firm. So the management information system is branched into the following. It can be branched into manufacturing, finance, marketing, engineering, personnel, and lastly, research and development. So what is the purpose of MIS? So it provides a basis for the analysis of early warning signals that can originate both externally and internally. Also, it automates routine clerical operations like payroll and inventory reports. It assists managers in making routine decisions like scheduling orders, assigning orders to machines, and reordering supplies. Lastly, providing information necessary for management to make strategic or non-program decisions is one of the purpose of MIS. So that is all for our presentation. Thank you guys for listening. Again, we talked about communication with my group mate, Bryan Jericho Kane. The slides were made by Virgil Lopena and JERIC MALAPITAN. And as for our other two group members, we have Justin Joseph CUSTODIO and JASEN MANALO.